Have you ever had this happen where you're driving home on a route you take every single day, right?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
You pull into your driveway, you put the car in park, and you suddenly realize you have absolutely zero memory of the last 15 minutes.
Right, your mind just went somewhere else entirely.
Exactly. I mean, you were maybe thinking about an argument you had at work or, playing out some hypothetical scenario, but your brain somehow kept your hands on the wheel, stopped at the red lights, and got you home safely.
Yeah, people usually refer to it casually as highway hypnosis.
Right. And, well, the reason we are starting there with that universal, slightly eerie feeling where your body is doing one thing but your consciousness is entirely unplugged from it is because that is a mild, everyday form of dissociation.
It really is, yeah.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore what happens when the mind detaches from reality to cope with overwhelming stress. We are looking at a cluster of mental health conditions called dissociative disorders.
Which is such a fascinating area.
It is. The goal today for you listening is to explore how the mind, which usually feels like this, seamless, continuous flow of identity, memory, and emotion, literally comes apart at the seams.
And I think it's a deeply misunderstood topic because structurally, dissociation is not a character flaw.
Right.
It's not someone just like zoning out because they lack focus. At its extreme clinical end, dissociation is an incredible, albeit highly disruptive protective mechanism.
Yeah.
It is the brain trying to survive something that is simply too much to process all at once.
I was actually trying to visualize the mechanics of this, and I keep coming back to a computer analogy.
Well, I like those. Let's hear it.
Well, it feels like a smartphone running way too many heavy applications during a system crash. Like the processor is completely overloaded, right?
Yeah.
So to keep the core system from catching fire and melting the motherboard, it just forcefully shuts down certain background processes.
That makes total sense.
It drops the non-essential operations just to keep the device powered on at all.
That is actually a very accurate way to visualize it. I mean, to keep functioning, the mind walls off a piece of the incoming experience so the rest of the psychological system can keep moving forward.
It just cuts the cord.
Exactly. It severs the connection between the trauma and the conscious awareness of the person experiencing it.
But if we really want to unpack how the mind protects itself by breaking apart, I think we first have to understand the nature of the thing that is breaking. Like, what is the baseline?
Right, and this brings us to the unifying idea across all dissociative disorders, which honestly is a massive paradigm shift if you have never encountered the concept before.
Okay.
The foundational idea is this: integration is a psychological achievement, not a given.
Wait. Let me make sure I'm following that. You're saying the feeling I have right now of being one cohesive person with a past, present, and future isn't just my default factory setting.
No, it really isn't.
It takes actual effort from my brain to maintain that feeling.
Precisely. Under normal conditions, your brain is actively working, like right this second, to bind together a massive amount of disparate data.
Wow.
It is stitching together your sense of body ownership, your ongoing narrative memory, your emotional state, and your sense of agency. It synthesizes all of those separate data streams into one continuous feeling of me.
So it's an active process.
Yes, and dissociation is simply the failure of this binding process. The stitching basically comes undone.
Okay, so I shouldn't think of a shattered personality like a dropped dinner plate breaking into a dozen pieces. I should think of it more like a massive jigsaw puzzle that the brain just stopped trying to put together.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
Its pieces are all there, but they aren't connected to form a single picture.
That is exactly the distinction. And when that puzzle fails to come together, we see specific clinical manifestations. The DSM-5-TR, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Psychiatry, breaks this down into 3 primary diagnoses.
Right, and I've always struggled with the difference between the first 2 elements of that first diagnosis, which is depersonalization and derealization.
It's a common point of confusion.
Is one about me and the other about the room I'm standing in?
You hit the nail on the head. Depersonalization is when you feel completely detached from your own body. You might feel like you're hovering above yourself or that your limbs don't actually belong to you.
It sounds terrifying.
It can be. And derealization, on the other hand, is directed outward. You feel like the external world is unreal or foggy, or like you are walking through a movie set or a dream.
But the sources make a huge point about something called reality testing. They say in these states, reality testing remains intact. What does that actually mean in practice?
It basically means your brain hasn't lost touch with the physical laws of the universe.
Okay.
Like, if you are experiencing derealization, you might feel like you are in a dream, but you still know that you aren't actually asleep in a bed somewhere. You still know up is up and down is down.
So you aren't hallucinating.
Right? You haven't lost your grip on objective reality, which is what happens in psychosis.
Yeah.
But your emotional and sensory connection to that reality has been severed. It is a terrifying feeling because you are highly aware that something feels fundamentally wrong.
Man, that just sounds exhausting.
It is.
Now, the second diagnosis is dissociative amnesia. And just to be clear to you listening, this isn't just like forgetting where you put your keys or struggling to recall a coworker's name.
Not at all.
This is walled-off autobiographical memory, usually connected to something stressful or traumatic. Your brain essentially throws up a firewall around a specific block of time.
Exactly.
But then we get to the third diagnosis, which is where pop culture goes absolutely wild. Dissociative identity disorder, or DD.
Yes. This is defined by two or more distinct personality states, often referred to clinically as alters taking control of the individual's behavior. And it's accompanied by massive memory gaps.
Right.
And the naming history here is incredibly important to understand.
Okay, let's unpack this. DA used to be called multiple personality disorder, or MPD. And I think a lot of people still use that term casually. Why did the psychiatric community change the name in 1994? Wasn't it just a PR move to rebrand a controversial disorder?
No, not at all. The renaming in the 1994 DSM-IV was one of the most consequential relabelings in psychiatric history. It corrected a fundamental, massive misconception.
Really? How so?
The disorder was never about someone having several complete separate people somehow sharing a single biological body.
Which is exactly how every single movie portrays it.
Exactly. The new name, dissociative identity disorder, reflects the actual scientific reality. It is about a single personality that has failed to integrate into a cohesive whole.
Right, going back to that puzzle analogy.
Yes, it is a failure of integration expressing itself in fragmented states. The old name, multiple personality, invited this sensationalized, almost sci-fi misreading that the medical field desperately needed to escape.
So it's not a multiplication of selves, it's a fragmentation of oneself. It's the puzzle pieces operating independently.
Beautifully put.
And to understand how this condition became so profoundly misunderstood, we need to trace it back to who first noticed this phenomenon. Now, most people, when they think of early psychoanalysis and hidden memories, immediately think of Sigmund Freud.
Which is a very common assumption, but historically inaccurate in this specific context.
Yeah.
The true conceptual groundwork for dissociation was laid by a French psychiatrist named Pierre Janet in the 1880s and 90s. He was working at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris.
Salpêtrière, right.
And Janet coined the term désagrégation mentale, which translates to mental disaggregation.
And he was working with a famous patient named Leonie, right? She was showing these spontaneous trance states and seemingly separate streams of memory.
Yes, exactly.
And just to place this in time for you listening, Janet is doing this work in Paris right around the exact same time Freud and Joseph Breuer are in Vienna treating a patient known as Anna O for very similar symptoms. You know, amnesia, altered states, paralysis with no physical cause.
Yeah, the two theories were developing simultaneously, but Freud eventually pivoted the entire field toward his own theory of repression and the unconscious drive.
Right, the Freudian slip and all that.
Yeah, and Freud's framework completely eclipsed Janet's for most of the 20th century.
Okay, wait, this is where I need some clarification. Isn't Janet's dissociation just Freud's concept of repression by a different name? Like your brain pushing bad memories away into the dark corners of the mind?
That is a vital distinction to make. They are often confused, but the underlying mechanisms are entirely different.
Okay.
Repression, in the Freudian sense, is an active push by the ego. The mind decides a memory or a desire is unacceptable and forcefully shoves it down into the unconscious.
It's doing work to hide it.
Exactly. Janet's concept of dissociation, however, is a passive failure.
Passive.
Yes, the mind was simply too overwhelmed by an experience to process it in the first place. It didn't actively push the memory away, the system crashed, so the memory just never got stitched into the main fabric of the self.
Oh, wow. It never got a chance to be bound to the me.
Precisely.
And because it wasn't bound, it can operate independently. The sources have these wild, concrete historical examples of this operating in the real world.
They do. These historical cases are fascinating.
Let's look at Ansel Bourne from 1887. He was a Rhode Island preacher who literally vanished, just disappeared from his home, Everyone thought foul play might be involved, and then he woke up 2 months later in Pennsylvania running a small shop under the name A.J. Brown.
With absolutely zero memory of his past life as a preacher.
None. It's crazy.
That is the textbook demonstration of a dissociative fugue. It was heavily investigated by the pioneering psychologist William James. And Bourne wasn't faking or lying to escape debts.
Right.
How it works mechanically is that his brain created two non-communicating streams of autobiographical memory sitting inside one single nervous system.
So the stress or trauma he was running from caused the puzzle to completely detach into two separate clusters?
Yes. And when he snapped back to being Ansel Bourne, the firewall went back up, and he had no memory of the time he spent as A.J. Brown.
And then, jumping forward to the 1950s, you have the case of Chris Costner Sizemore, who became famous in pop culture as the Three Faces of Eve.
A very famous case.
Her psychiatrist documented at least 3 alternating identity states. But here's the detail that stopped me in my tracks when reading the sources. Her different identity states had measurably different allergic responses on physical skin tests.
It's hard to believe, isn't it?
I mean, how is that biologically possible? Does the immune system have multiple personalities?
It is a staggering data point, but it speaks to how deeply cognitive state controls biology. When we talk about allergic reactions, we are talking about an immune response, and that is heavily regulated by the autonomic nervous system.
Okay, so that controls what? Heart rate?
Heart rate, cortisol release, and histamine reactivity. If different identity states are essentially different, isolated neural networks taking control of the brain, those different networks can establish entirely different physiological baselines. Wow.
Yeah, so one identity state might be holding the trauma, meaning its sympathetic nervous system is highly activated, leading to a massive histamine release when exposed to an allergen.
Because it's already on high alert.
Exactly. But another state might be completely calm, resulting in a negative allergy test.
The mind's compartmentalization is so absolute that it dictates the body's cellular response in real time. That is incredible.
It really is.
Sizemore later became a huge mental health advocate and actually described experiencing over 20 personality states before finally reaching what she called integration.
Yeah, she did a lot of good work later in life.
But wait, if these early cases like Ansel Bourne and Chris Costner Sizemore were so incredibly rare, like basically isolated medical anomalies, what on earth happened in the 1970s that caused the medical system to suddenly diagnose thousands of people?
That is the pivotal question. I mean, how do we go from a historical rarity to a sudden epidemic?
Right.
It really comes down to how a genuine clinical phenomenon intersects with suggestibility, pop culture, and highly questionable therapeutic practices. Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly deeply troubling. In 1973, a journalist named Flora Rita Schreiber publishes a book called Sybil.
Right.
It was about a patient named Shirley Ardell Mason, who supposedly had 16 distinct personalities. The book becomes a massive cultural phenomenon. It is widely credited with triggering a total explosion in multiple personality disorder diagnoses across North America.
It really was an explosion.
We went from a few dozen known cases in history to literally thousands by the 1990s.
And that massive spike in diagnoses looked less like a stable disease being better identified and far more like a diagnostic fashion trend.
Yeah.
But the true tragedy was that the foundation of the Sybil case was entirely compromised.
Yeah.
In 2011, investigative journalist Debbie Nathan published Sybil Exposed. She used newly available clinical records, audio tapes, and personal letters.
And the details she uncovered are just dark. Sybil's psychiatrist, Cornelia Wilbur, was routinely using hypnosis and high doses of sodium pentothal, which is often called truth serum.
Right, which is a total misnomer.
Yeah, we now know biologically that sodium pentothal doesn't make you tell the truth. It just lowers your inhibitions and makes you incredibly highly suggestible and prone to confabulation.
Exactly. And just to define confabulation, it is not the same as conscious lying. The human brain naturally abhors a vacuum.
Okay.
If there is a gap in memory, a person is highly suggestible, the brain will genuinely construct false information to fill that gap, completely believing it to be true.
And Wilbur was asking leading questions for years while Sybil was in this highly suggestible state. Shirley Ardell Mason even wrote letters to her doctor admitting she was faking it.
She did.
She literally wrote that she was none of the things the doctor believed her to be, but she was performing these fragmented symptoms because she realized it was what her therapist wanted to see.
Which brings us to the core scientific fight that is still actively raging in academic journals today. The trauma model versus the sociocognitive model.
Let's lay these mechanisms out because they are fundamentally opposed on how this disorder actually develops in the patient, right?
Right. So the trauma model argues that dissociative identity disorder is a genuine organic psychological adaptation to severe chronic childhood trauma.
Okay.
The mechanism here is survival. If a child's mind lacks the emotional and neurological resources to process horrific, ongoing abuse, it compartmentalizes the trauma into separate self-states.
I see.
The mind walls off the abuse so that the host child can continue going to school and functioning in daily life without being paralyzed by terror.
The mind breaks itself on purpose to survive the unsurvivable.
Yes, exactly. Now, on the other side, you have the sociocognitive model. This model argues that DAD is largely iatrogenic.
Meaning caused by the doctor.
Yes, iatrogenic is a medical term meaning the condition is inadvertently caused by the therapist or the treatment itself. This model suggests that highly suggestible, vulnerable patients learn to perform the role of a fragmented person in response to therapist expectations, media portrayals like Sybil, and social reinforcement.
So under this model, they aren't maliciously lying. They're unconsciously adopting a cultural script that the therapist is rewarding with attention and validation.
Right. And what's fascinating here is the cross-cultural data. When you look at psychiatric practices globally, DID diagnoses are extremely common in North America, but historically they are almost absent in most other countries.
Well, wait, that doesn't make sense if it's purely trauma-based. I mean, severe childhood trauma happens everywhere in the world, unfortunately.
Exactly. The rates of severe childhood trauma globally do not track with that North American spike in DID diagnoses. This is a very compelling argument for the sociocognitive model. It suggests that cultural scripts and clinician expectations heavily shape the way distress and dissociation are actually expressed.
And we really can't talk about clinician expectation without bringing up Elizabeth Loftus and the recovered memory controversy of the 80s and 90s.
Oh, absolutely. A very dark era.
This was a time where therapists, using the exact same suggestive techniques and hypnosis we saw in the Sybil case, were helping patients recover supposedly repressed memories of horrific childhood abuse. And in some cases, massive satanic ritual abuse rings.
Memories that were later investigated by the FBI and proven to be entirely false.
Right.
They were implanted through suggestion, not retrieved from the past.
Yeah.
And to understand how that happens, you have to understand the mechanism of memory reconsolidation.
How does that work?
Well, human memory is not a hard drive playing back a video file.
Mm-hmm.
It is more like opening a text document. Every time you recall a memory, it becomes malleable.
Oh, wow.
If a therapist is asking leading questions while that memory is open, they are effectively typing false details into the document before the brain hits save and stores it again.
That is terrifying. I mean, that dynamic literally fueled the McMartin preschool trial, which was the most expensive criminal trial in U.S. history at the time. And it ended with 0 convictions because the allegations were entirely traced back to these deeply flawed, suggestive interviewing techniques used on children.
It was a disaster.
It led to the creation of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
And the profound tragedy of that era is that legitimate research into dissociative amnesia and real trauma responses got completely tangled up with a genuine epidemic of bad clinical practice.
Yeah.
The psychiatric field is still working today to separate the reality of the trauma model from the damage of that suggestive era. The consensus now leans toward a synthesis. Both mechanisms, real trauma histories, and social suggestibility are likely at play in different cases.
And this isn't just an academic debate happening in the ivory towers of medical journals. This fragmentation of the mind has profound real-world consequences. It affects hospitals, therapy offices, and it creates massive paradoxes in the courts.
It really does.
Take the Billy Milligan case in Ohio in 1977. Milligan was charged with a series of rapes, and he became the first defendant in U.S. legal history to be found not guilty by reason of insanity based on a DID diagnosis. He reportedly had 24 distinct personalities.
And that case triggered an enormous legal and philosophical controversy that our courts still struggle with today, because it breaks the fundamental rules of jurisprudence.
Right, because this raises a wild philosophical and legal issue for you as a listener to ponder. If an alter commits a crime, how does a jury decide who is legally the person?
That's the million-dollar question.
Criminal law usually requires 2 things to align: this physical act and the intent. But if personality number 4 committed the crime with full intent and personalities 1, 2, and 3 were completely unaware, separated by an amnesic wall, do you lock up the whole body? Are you functionally punishing innocent fragments of a person who had no intent?
It pushes our legal doctrine of individual responsibility to its absolute breaking point. The entire legal framework relies on the concept of a unified person. When neurological integration fails, the legal framework fails right alongside it. There are no easy answers.
That is a very heavy concept to wrestle with. So before we wrap up, let's make sure we are totally clearing the air, because there are so many lingering pop culture myths out there about dissociation.
Oh, definitely.
Let's rapid fire bust some misconceptions. Myth number 1, DD is just another word for schizophrenia.
Fact. They are entirely unrelated mechanisms. Schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder characterized by hallucinations and delusions, like a break from objective reality.
Okay.
DD is a condition of memory and identity fragmentation. Clinicians actively have to warn against this confusion because treating a dissociative patient with heavy antipsychotics won't heal the trauma.
Myth number 2, people with DID are dangerous, unpredictable, and violent.
Fact. This is a Hollywood trope built around the idea of a monstrous alter. In reality, statistical research consistently finds that people with DID are far more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators.
Which makes complete sense when you understand it as a disorder born out of chronic childhood victimization.
Exactly.
All right, myth number 3. If you have a dissociative disorder, it is highly obvious to everyone around you. You know, you're dramatically switching identities in the middle of a sentence at the grocery store.
Fact. Many people with DID are incredibly skilled at hiding it. The switches between states are often entirely internal and subtle. And think about the why here.
Okay.
If the disorder is a survival mechanism designed to hide severe abuse from the abuser and from the host self, drawing dramatic attention to it defeats the evolutionary purpose.
It's meant to be covert.
Yes. This is why it is frequently misdiagnosed for years as severe depression, anxiety, or borderline personality disorder.
So why does all of this matter to you, listening to this right now? Even if you never meet someone with a clinical dissociative disorder, the mechanics of dissociation are all around us.
It matters deeply in our everyday systems.
Hmm.
Dissociation is a documented factor in how reliable eyewitness testimony is, for instance.
Oh, right.
If you witness a traumatic crime, your brain's protective instinct might wall off the memory, making you an unreliable witness despite your absolute best intentions.
Wow.
It also matters for our combat veterans and our first responders. In fact, PTSD is so closely tied to this mechanism that the DSM-5 added a specific dissociative subtype of PTSD for patients who experience severe depersonalization alongside their flashbacks.
Understanding the mechanism completely changes how we view trauma survivors.
It really does. When we understand dissociation as a brilliant, if flawed, protective survival mechanism rather than a character flaw or an attention-seeking behavior or a lie, it removes the stigma.
Yeah.
It also pushes back against the old, damaging assumption that if a victim's memory of a trauma is fragmented or fuzzy, they must be fabricating the story. The fragmentation itself is often neurological evidence of the mind trying to survive the event.
So what does this all mean? If we look back at the whole journey today, dissociation is a spectrum that we are all on. From zoning out on the highway and letting our background processes drive the car, to profound clinical amnesia. It is a failure of integration born from an overwhelmed system. It was pioneered by Pierre Janet in the 1880s, tragically distorted by suggestibility and pop culture in cases like Sybil, and it remains a complex, deeply human mechanism that challenges our laws and our medicine.
And it leaves us with a rather provocative thought about the modern world to mull over.
What's that?
Well, we started by establishing that integration being one cohesive self is a fragile psychological achievement. Today, we live in a digital age where almost all of us maintain entirely separate, walled-off identities.
Oh, wow.
You might have an extremely professional LinkedIn persona, a highly curated Instagram self, and a completely anonymous, combative Reddit avatar. If our brains are plastic and they adapt to what we practice, are our online habits mimicking a mild form of dissociation?
That's wild to think about.
Are we accidentally training our own minds to fragment our identities, making it harder and harder to achieve that psychological integration in the real world?
Wow. Are we actively practicing disaggregation? That is going to stick with me for a long time.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of the mind. Keep questioning the world around you, and the next time you pull into your driveway without remembering the commute, just give a little lot of respect to the background processes keeping your system running.